What if I told you that some of the most disturbing conspiracy theories that were ever whispered weren't imagined at all? What if they weren't born in internet forums, or late night radio shows, or paranoid minds, but inside government buildings? What if the reason certain ideas sound crazy today isn't because they're false, but because the truth was once so disturbing it had to be buried beneath ridicule? Today isn't about fear, it's about memory. Because MK Ultra wasn't just a program, it was a movement in history, when a government decided that the human mind was no longer sacred. And once that line is crossed, it never truly gets uncrossed. To understand MK Ultra, you have to understand the world that created it. This was not a calm time. This was not a rational era. This was the Cold War. A number of years before, the world had watched Hiroshima and Nagasaki be erased in seconds. The Soviet Union had detonated its own bombs also. Mutually assured destruction became a casual phrase, as if extinction itself were just policy language. And then something happened that terrified intelligence agencies more than nuclear weapons ever could. American prisoners of war returned from Korea, different. Some praised communism, some criticised capitalism. Some confessed to war crimes they hadn't committed. The US didn't ask, are these confessions true? They asked something far more dangerous. What if the enemy has figured out how to control the human mind? The word brainwashing entered the public language, not through science, through panic, and panic, when mixed with power, creates monsters. At the centre of this fear stood CIA Director Alan Dulles. Dulles believed the US was losing a secret war, not of bombs or borders, but of psychological dominance. In 1953, he spoke publicly about the new battlefield. Not land, not air, but the human psyche. That same year, the CIA authorised a program so secret that even many within the agency didn't know it existed. Its name was deliberately meaningless. MK Ultra. No clear objectives, no ethical oversight, no requirement for consent. Just one guiding question. Can human behaviour be controlled? And if the answer was yes, who gets to decide how it's used? The CIA became obsessed with one substance, LSD. At the time it was legal, but poorly understood, and psychologically devastating when misused. They believed LSD could dissolve identity, lower resistance, fragment memory, and create obedience. In other words, it could turn a human being into raw psychological material. So they began dosing people. Prisoners, mental health patients, soldiers, students, often without consent, often without knowledge, sometimes repeatedly. Imagine waking up in hospital, unable to trust your own thoughts. Imagine being given a drink at a bar and hours later feeling reality peel away. This wasn't exploration, this was psychological demolition. Frank Olson was not a nobody, and that matters. He wasn't unstable, he wasn't on the fringe, he wasn't expendable. Frank Olson was a biochemist, a civilian scientist working directly with the CIA and US Army. He worked at Fort Detrick, the centre of America's biological and psychological warfare research. Anthrax, aerosols, human incapacitation. This wasn't theory, this was weaponisation. And by late 1953, something had changed in Olson. Colleagues later said he became deeply disturbed by the direction the research was heading, particularly experiments involving unwitting human subjects. He talked about quitting. He talked about leaving government service. He talked. Then came the retreat. A small group of CIA scientists gathered at a cabin in Maryland. Drinks were poured, the mood was relaxed, and without his knowledge, without his consent, Frank Olson was dosed with LSD. This was not an accident, it was authorized. At the time, LSD was viewed as a psychological crowbar, a tool to pry open the mind. Within hours, Olson began to unravel. Paranoia, disorientation, and fear. He told a colleague something chilling. "I've made a terrible mistake." Over the next 9 days, his condition worsened. He couldn't sleep, he couldn't think, he couldn't recognise himself. And here's a detail that should stop you cold. The CIA did not panic because a man was suffering. They panicked because a man who knew secrets was breaking down. They sent Olson to New York to see a psychiatrist connected to the CIA. On the night of November the 28th, 1953, Frank Olson fell from the 13th floor of the Statler Hotel. The official verdict was suicide and case closed. But decades later, Olson's body was exhumed. A forensic pathologist found evidence of a blunt force injury to the head before the fall. Not consistent with suicide, really. Consistent with being struck or incapacitated. Ask yourself this carefully. If MK Ultra was willing to destroy minds without consent, is it really unthinkable they wouldn't destroy a man to protect secrets? The CIA later apologized to the Olson family. Not for killing him, but for dosing him. A legal apology, a strategic apology. The kind that admits just enough to close the door without opening the truth. Frank Olson died because he knew too much and trusted the wrong institution. If that doesn't unsettle you, ask yourself why. If the story ended there, it would already be unbearable. But MK Ultra went further. The CIA funded brothels in San Francisco and New York. Prostitutes were paid to lure men inside. Behind one-way mirrors, the CIA agents watched. The men were secretly dosed with LSD. Their reactions were recorded. This was called Operation Midnight Climax. No consent, no humanity, no accountability, just observation, just control. In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered most MK Ultra files to be destroyed. Why? Because exposure was coming. When Congress investigated in the 1970s, only fragments remained. What we know is horrifying. What we don't know is immeasurable. You cannot calculate damage from records that no longer exist. MK Ultra was real, but not every modern claim is. There were no instant activation phrases, no remote-controlled assassinations, but there was something more unsettling, the weaponization of psychology itself. MK Ultra didn't invent mind control. It exploited existing principles like conditioning, learned helplessness, disassociation, and authority obedience. The same principles used in education, advertising, military training, and even media. The difference was consent, because MK Ultra removed it. So here's the real question. Not does mind control exist, but this. Have we been psychologically conditioned to trust institutions that once experimented on us without consent? This isn't paranoia, it's psychological literacy. Because the most effective control doesn't feel like control. It feels like normality, it feels like safety, it feels like trust. MK Ultra didn't prove that minds can be controlled. It proved something far more unsettling. That under fear, under secrecy, under pressure, even democracies will cross lines they later pretend never existed. The question isn't, could it happen again? The question is, would we recognise it if it did?